The wind howled across the dusty plains of the Montana Territory in 1875 as Elena Zimmerman clutched the edges of her weathered cloak. At 36, she had long ago given up the foolish idea that love might ever find her, especially in a place as unforgiving as Whitetail Creek. Yet here she stood, her trunk at her feet, waiting for the man who had answered her advertisement for a mail-order bride. A man she feared would turn her away the moment he discovered her age. Her gloved fingers trembled as she unfolded the crumpled letter for what felt like the 100th time. "Miss Zimmerman, I am in need of a wife who is sensible and hard-working. I offer a good home and honest treatment. Colton Yancey." The simplicity of his words had given her fragile hope. Now, that hope battled with dread, as the stagecoach that brought her here disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone at the edge of town. Elena smoothed her gray-flecked auburn hair and straightened her spine. Whatever awaited her, she would face it with dignity. "Miss Zimmerman." The deep voice startled her. She turned to see a tall man atop a chestnut mare. His face was partly hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but she caught the strong line of his jaw, the rugged skin burned by sun and wind. He swung down with surprising grace for a man his size. "Mr. Yancey?" she said softly. He nodded and removed his hat. Tousled dark hair streaked with silver-framed eyes of a startling blue. Those eyes studied her openly. Elena felt her cheeks grow hot. She knew what he saw. A woman past her prime, with lines at her eyes and mouth that told of years of work and loss, not the young bride he had likely imagined. I understand if this isn't what you expected," she began. From the porch of the general store, a few townspeople had gathered, watching with open curiosity. A woman's voice drifted across the space. Poor Colton ordered himself a bride and got a spinster instead. Laughter followed, sharp, cutting, and cruel. Each sound pierced her like a thorn. "I can arrange passage back east on tomorrow's coach," she whispered, bending toward her trunk. But before she could lift it, Colton's large, calloused hand covered hers. His voice carried clearly enough for the crowd to hear. "Miss Zimmerman," he said firmly, "may I have the honor of your hand?" Elena blinked, confused. "My hand?" A faint smile curved his lips. "Those folks think they know what makes a good wife. But what they don't understand is that some things in this world are timeless." He took her hand fully in his. "And you, Miss Zimmerman, you're timeless to me." The laughter died instantly. The crowd fell silent. Elena's throat tightened. "You don't have to say such things," she murmured. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply, lifting her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "You had the courage to cross half the country to meet a stranger. That tells me more than any letter could. I'd like the chance to learn the rest, if you'll let me." She searched his face, finding no mockery, only quiet strength. "Why would you want that? Surely you expected someone younger." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I've learned expectations fool a man. I'm 43, Miss Zimmerman. I value substance over appearance." He extended his hand again. "Would you like to see your new home?" Quote. After a moment's hesitation, Elena placed her hand in his. Together they mounted his horse and rode out of town, the whispers of the townspeople fading behind them. Colton's ranch lay 5 miles from Whitetail Creek, nestled against low foothills. The house was small but sturdy, with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Wildflowers grew freely along the path to the door, their colors bright against the rough land. "It's not much," Colton said as he helped her down, "but it's solid. Built it myself." "It's lovely," she said honestly. After years of renting cramped rooms in Boston boarding houses, the open air felt like a luxury. A large brown dog bounded around the corner, barking excitedly. Elena stepped back, but Colton touched her arm reassuringly. "That's Bear. He's loud, but he's gentle." The dog wagged so hard that his whole body shook. "Bear, meet Miss Zimmerman," Colton said. "Miss Zimmerman, this is Bear." Quote. Despite herself, Elena smiled. "Hello, Bear," she said, patting his head. Colton's approving nod was small, but genuine. He's got a good sense about people. "Come inside. You must be tired." The interior was simple, clean, and orderly. A stone fireplace dominated the main room. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-worn volumes that drew her eye. "You read?" she asked, surprised. "Winter nights get long out here," he said, looking almost shy. "Books help." He showed her 2 bedrooms. "I've prepared the smaller one for you, until we know each other better." Relief washed through her. "Thank you, Mr. Yancey." "Colton," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should use my name." "Colton," she repeated, the sound soft and strange on her tongue. "Then you must call me Elena." "It suits you," he said simply. An awkward silence lingered between them until he cleared his throat. "I should start supper. You can rest. Or—" "May I help?" she interrupted. He looked surprised. "If you'd like, though you must be tired." Quote, "I'd rather be useful," she said, rolling up her sleeves. They worked side by side, moving easily in a rhythm. Elena found herself watching him. His quiet focus, the gentleness of his movements despite his size. When they finally sat to eat, she asked, "Why did you send for a bride?" "Ranching's lonely work," he said. "Been alone since my pa died. Thought it was time to build more than just a living." "And you?" he asked in turn. "I worked as a seamstress in Boston," she said. "When the shop closed, there was nothing left for me there." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes the hardest changes bring the best rewards. After supper, they sat on the porch. The sunset burned gold over the hills, and Bear lay at Elena's feet. "The preacher comes through every 3rd Sunday," Colton said after a while. "He can marry us then, if that suits you. But if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your passage anywhere. No hard feelings." The kindness in his offer brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, Elena woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the kitchen. She smiled for the first time in a long while, unaware that this was only the beginning of the life she had always dreamed of but never thought she'd find. The sun rose bright and clear over the Montana hills, spilling golden light across Colton Yancey's ranch. Elena stepped outside with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching as mist drifted from the distant creek. The land was vast and untamed, but peaceful, a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. Colton was already outside, tightening a section of fence. His movements were steady, sure, the rhythm of a man who had lived his whole life in tune with the land. He noticed her watching and smiled. "Morning, Mrs." He caught himself and chuckled softly. "Miss Zimmerman, sleep well." "Better than I have in years," she admitted. "Good. Coffee smells strong enough to wake the dead," he said teasingly, taking a cup from her hand. "It's not that bad," she said, but his grin told her he disagreed. After breakfast, he saddled 2 horses. "I've got to check the north pasture. Thought you might come along. Time you got to know the land that could be yours someday." "Mine?" she asked, startled. "If you still mean to stay," he said simply. Something warm settled in her chest at his words. She followed him to the barn, where he introduced her to a gentle, dappled mare. "Here's Daisy," he said. "She's calm enough for a beginner." "I've never ridden before," Elena confessed. "Then today's a good day to learn." Her first attempts were clumsy, her hands stiff on the reins, but Colton's patience never faltered. He rode beside her, offering quiet instructions, his voice calm and steady. "Loosen your grip, Elena. Let her feel your balance. She'll follow your lead." By afternoon, she was riding at a slow, confident pace. When she looked at him, his approving smile made her feel younger than she had in years. That evening, they shared stew by the fire. The smell of wood smoke and the soft crackle of the flames filled the small cabin. Elena felt oddly at home. "May I ask you something, Colton?" she said, setting down her spoon. "Of course. When you saw me step off that coach, did you think of turning away?" He took his time answering, staring into the fire. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised. But not disappointed. You looked like someone who'd seen hardship and didn't let it break her. That's worth more than a smooth face or a pretty smile." His words brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "You say things that no man ever has." "Maybe other men were fools," he said simply. The next morning, Colton rode to town for supplies. Elena spent the day tending the small garden beside the house. The soil was dry, but she knew how to coax life from stubborn earth. She worked until her hands were stained with dirt, pausing only when she heard the rhythmic beat of hooves. Colton returned with 2 horses, leading Daisy and another laden with supplies. "You've been busy," he said, taking in the freshly weeded garden. "I hope you don't mind," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "I enjoy gardening." "Mind? I'm grateful. That patch hasn't looked this good in years." Quote. He unloaded the supplies and held up a new saddle blanket. "Brought this for Daisy. Figured every lady deserves something fine of her own." Elena smiled shyly. "You keep surprising me, Colton Yancey." "I plan to keep doing that," he said, his eyes glinting with quiet humor. The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked together from dawn till dusk, Elena in the garden and kitchen, Colton in the fields and barns. In the evenings they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes silence was enough. One night, after reading from a worn book of poetry by the fire, Elena asked, "Did you ever love anyone before?" Colton's face softened. "Once. Her name was Sarah. We planned to marry, but she took ill with mountain fever, never recovered." "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. He nodded. "That was a long time ago. Life goes on. What about you?" "There was someone," she said after a pause, "when I taught school in Philadelphia. But he didn't want to wait when I left to care for my father. I suppose he found someone younger." "Then he was blind," Colton said, his voice steady. "Some men don't know value when they see it." The warmth in his tone made her look away, afraid he'd see how deeply his words affected her. On the 8th day after her arrival, Colton said they'd need to go into town for supplies. Elena hesitated, remembering the cruel laughter that had greeted her before. As they rode into Whitetail Creek, whispers followed them again. Women standing outside the general store leaned close, hiding smirks behind gloved hands. Colton dismounted and offered her his hand. "Head high, Elena," he said quietly. "Let them see who you are." Inside the store, the chatter died at once. The shopkeeper recovered first. "Colton, and this must be your visitor." "My fiancée," Colton said clearly. "Miss Elena Zimmerman." The man blinked, startled, then bowed awkwardly. "Well, welcome to Whitetail Creek, Miss Zimmerman." Before she could reply, a group of women entered. Among them was the one who had mocked her that first day. Her voice dripped with sweetness. "Why, Mr. Yancey, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" "Mrs. Dunham," Colton said politely. "This is my fiancée, Miss Zimmerman. We'll be married this Sunday." Mrs. Dunham's eyebrows rose. "So soon! My, such haste! Is there a particular reason for that?" Colton met her gaze evenly. "Yes," he said, "because when a man's lucky enough to find a woman of character and grace, he'd be a fool to wait." He placed a protective hand at the small of Elena's back. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have errands to finish." They left behind a silence thick with stunned faces. Outside, Elena's cheeks burned. "You didn't have to defend me like that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Colton replied. "Because you deserve respect, Elena. And because you're mine to protect." The words struck deep in her heart. They rode home in quiet. Then, just before they reached the ranch, Colton turned off the main trail. "There's something I want to show you." He led her up a grassy hill to a small clearing overlooking a crystal lake. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow, and the reflection of the mountains shimmered on the water's surface. "It's beautiful," she breathed. He nodded. "I come here when I need to remember what matters. Thought you might need it today." She smiled through tears. "You're kind, Colton. Kinder than anyone I've known." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but sure. "You're worth kindness, Elena, and you're worth love." Her breath caught. "Even an old maid like me?" He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Age doesn't matter. You're timeless." For a long moment they stood there, the world holding its breath. Then, slowly, he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elena Zimmerman," he said, "you are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Sunday dawned bright and clear, sunlight spilling over the rolling hills like a blessing. Elena stood before the small mirror in her room, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons on her cream-colored dress. It wasn't new, but she had mended it carefully, softening the fabric with tiny stitches of hope. She barely recognized the woman staring back. There was color in her cheeks, a spark in her green eyes, and a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. A knock sounded at the door. "Elena, you ready?" "Yes," she called, turning to see Colton standing in the hallway, dressed in a clean gray suit. He had combed his hair neatly, and his eyes lit up the moment he saw her. "You're beautiful," he said softly. "And you," she replied, "look quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it. Together they rode to Whitetail Creek, the same road where she had once faced laughter and scorn. Today she rode with her head high, the wind lifting strands of her hair as if the world itself approved. When they reached the small white church, Elena's heart stuttered. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside. "I thought this would be private," she whispered nervously. Colton smiled. "Word travels fast in small towns. Let them see what real love looks like." Inside, the church was filled with curious faces, faces that had once mocked her. But when Colton took her hand, the whispers faded. His steady presence anchored her. Preacher Williams, a tall man with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Yancey, Miss Zimmerman, are you ready to begin?" "Yes," Colton said, "we are." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if he took this woman to be his wife, Colton's voice was strong and clear. "With all my heart," he said. And when Elena repeated her vows, her voice trembled only once, on the word love. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said. Colton cupped her face gently, kissing her with tenderness that silenced every whisper in that church. For the first time since she'd arrived in Whitetail Creek, Elena felt seen, truly seen, not for her age or her past, but for her courage and her heart. When they stepped outside, several townsfolk came forward with hesitant smiles. Herbert Jenkins, the storekeeper, shook Colton's hand heartily. His wife, Martha, pulled Elena into a warm embrace. "Welcome to Whitetail Creek, Mrs. Yancey," she said brightly. "We'll expect you at the quilting circle next Wednesday." Quote, even Mrs. Dunham managed a strained but genuine congratulations. On the ride home, Elena held tightly to Colton's arm. "I thought they all disapproved," she said quietly. "They just needed to see it for themselves," Colton replied. "What we have is real. That's hard to deny." When they reached the ranch, Bear bounded toward them, tail wagging furiously. Colton surprised Elena by sweeping her off her feet and carrying her inside. "Colton!" she gasped, laughing. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he said, grinning. "It's tradition." Inside, the table was set with his best dishes, a small bouquet of wildflowers at its center. "You did this?" she asked softly. "Wanted today to be special for you," he said. "It already is." That night, as the fire burned low, Elena found herself facing a new kind of fear, the tender kind that comes with trust. She stood by the window, her heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. Colton approached slowly, taking her hands in his. "Elena," he said quietly, "nothing happens tonight that you don't want. We've got all the time in the world." Relief flooded her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's just been so long since anyone—" He touched her cheek. "Since anyone treated you gently," he finished. "I understand." He kissed her forehead and led her to bed. "Tonight we rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow we begin forever." They fell asleep tangled together, her head against his chest, his arm around her as if to shield her from the world. For the first time in years, Elena slept without fear. Months passed, each one weaving them closer together. The ranch flourished under their shared care. Elena's garden bloomed, and her laughter filled the house. She joined Martha's quilting circle and soon became known for her kindness and wit. The whispers about her age faded, replaced by quiet admiration. Then, one winter morning, she handed Colton a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said, eyes shining. He opened it carefully, revealing a tiny knitted baby shoe. His breath caught. "Elena, are you?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, we're going to have a baby." Colton's face broke into a smile so full of joy it stole her breath. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her once before stopping abruptly. "Should I not do that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Elena laughed through her tears. "I'm fine, Colton. Just promise me you'll build the cradle." "I'll carve it myself," he said, "with flowers like the ones that grow by the porch." When their daughter was born that autumn, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows, Colton wept openly. He held the tiny child against his chest and whispered, "Catherine Hope Yancey, after your mother's strength and your mother's heart." The months that followed were the happiest of their lives. The community that had once doubted Elena now came to her door for advice, for recipes, for company. She had become part of Whitetail Creek, woven into its story-like thread through homespun cloth. Years later, on their porch beneath a sky full of stars, Colton traced the lines at the corners of her eyes. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming here, marrying me?" Quote. Elena smiled, her silver hair catching the starlight. "Not for a single moment. That day at the stagecoach, I thought my life was over. Turns out it was just beginning." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." She laughed quietly. "You're a sentimental old cowboy." "Maybe," he said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "But you're timeless to me, Elena. You always will be." The sound of their children's laughter drifted from the house behind them. The Montana wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the porch. Elena rested her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes, her heart full. Once she had come to Whitetail Creek seeking survival. Now she had found eternity, timeless. Just as he'd said,